We're excited to share this virtual lecture with all of you titled A Bedrock Business Plan, Saving the Last of South Florida's Pine Rocklands. Today's topic will be presented by Sarah Martin, TNC's South Florida Land Conservation Coordinator. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and without further ado, Sarah, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Kate. Can you hear me okay?
You can.
All right, great. I am going to share my screen here. Can you all see my presentation?
Yes.
All right. Well, yeah, thank you. Thank you, Kate, and thank you other TNC friends who are here today, both colleagues and attendees of the presentation. I really appreciate you taking the time to learn a little bit more about Pine Rocklands with us today. So this presentation is the Pine Rockland Business Plan Project, and this presentation is for this lecture series here today. So I will, without further ado, get started. Just a little bit about who I am. So I'm, you can hear me okay? Okay. Oh, it was, sorry, it was outside noise. I am the South Florida Land Conservation Coordinator for the Florida chapter of the Nature Conservancy. So that is, just to explain a little bit about how that all works. In the Florida chapter of the Nature Conservancy, we have a Central Florida program, a North Florida program, and a South Florida program that all work with kind of habitat restoration and management type work out on the landscape, out on our preserves, like Blowing Rocks Preserve, Tiger Creek Preserve, Disney Wilderness Preserve, all of the preserves and conservation lands in South Florida. So my job as land conservation coordinator is to ensure that they're really all in the best condition, making sure that we're removing invasive species and just providing that on the ground stewardship work to the landscape on a day-to-day basis. But that also is for our other conservation projects that we do in the South Florida region. So not just on TNC's conservation lands that we own and manage, but on other types of projects that might be partnership projects on other folks' lands, whether they're private lands or public lands. And so my position, I am based at Blowing Rocks Preserve, which is a great place to be. I work with all the folks here on this call, Kristen and Kate and others, but we also connect very often with our other colleagues in Central Florida and places like that. And being at Blowing Rocks Preserve is pretty special because that means we get to do all the stewardship work here at Blowing Rocks, but again, all the way down to the Florida Keys. We're busy maintaining that landscape. And so Kate kind of already talked about this, and all of you guys hopefully do know who TNC is, but just to reiterate, our mission is to conserve the lands and waters on which all life depends. And our vision is a world where the diversity of life thrives and people act to conserve nature for its own sake and its ability to fulfill our needs and enrich our lives. We're a conservation organization founded in 1951. And really, it's a great place to be if you're into protecting nature for its own sake and for people. And across TNC, so we're a global organization, but in North America, Florida is included in some of our higher priority areas where we relate to longleaf pine forests, the Gulf, the Everglades, and the Atlantic in general. And Florida is a very special place because we support a very high number of rare species here in this state, but also support a lot of nature-dependent economic sectors. We're really known for our wonderful beaches and all of the tourism that happens in Florida. So it's a place where we have a very high diversity of nature, but also a lot of people that are interested in getting out into Florida to experience it. And so for South Florida land conservation for TNC, that means that we really get to dig into some of these very unique South Florida landscapes that are just so full and rich with different types of biological diversity. In South Florida, we're in a very unique place where we come to kind of a place where the temperate climate and the tropical climates come to their latitudinal zones of transition. And so we just get a lot of really interesting species that are very unique to our area, but also have ranges that expand very far north and very far south. So the South Florida landscape, being here in South Florida, there's a lot of different ways to think about it. It's a very busy map with a lot of roads and a lot of towns and cities and high populations and urbanization. It's also a really nice place to live and to get out again into nature. But looking at it, more of that that aerial satellite imagery, you really can see how much wild nature is still here in South Florida and how many wonderful conservation lands we have in the region, everywhere from the Everglades to the 10,000 Islands and Big Cypress Swamp, down into the Florida Keys, the Florida Reef Tract. We have a lot of very special jewels here in South Florida to be stewarding. So I want to get into Pine Rocklands, but just to name a few of these other ones, just to remind people how special South Florida is. We've got our Atlantic coastal ecosystems and our beaches. Where are my slides advancing? Oh, there we go. We have our estuarine and mangrove forests and all of our tidal habitats. We have freshwater swamps and rivers and wetlands that look like places where you might find a dinosaur out there still someday, but you won't. A lot of coastal uplands that are highly diverse and are very special here in South Florida. But also a lot of hammocks that are both temperate and tropical, subtropical, maritime along the coast, that are very unique. And in our interior, we have our pine forests and our scrublands and many other types of habitats. I'm not going to be able to name all of them today, but just as a general overview of the diversity that when you get out into the real Florida, the different places that you might be able to experience. And so the Pine Rocklands are part of all of that. So we've got all these really unique, beautiful, wonderful landscapes in South Florida. And the Pine Rocklands are one of those pieces. Whoops. And in the global context, they are a very an ecosystem with a lot of interest. They have a very geographically narrow range. So they naturally only occur in South Florida, in Miami-Dade County, and down in the Florida Keys, and then parts of the Caribbean, particularly in the Turks and the Caicos and the Bahamas. So really just in extreme South Florida, this ecosystem naturally occurs. It's considered globally critically imperiled because of that global narrow range, but also because of the state of the Pine Rocklands today. So in Florida, the Pine Rocklands are especially found along what is called the Miami Rock Ridge, which is a ridge that extends through Miami-Dade County, and it is comprised of oolitic limestone. So it's a special kind of limestone substrate. And that's where all of primarily Miami-Dade County's Pine Rocklands occur. And then there is a great amount of them that are protected out in Everglades National Park and somewhat in Big Cypress National Park. And then if you were to take a trip down to the Florida Keys and drive down to Big Pine Key, you will be able to experience the Pine Rocklands that occur in the South Florida Keys. So they're very, very much the same ecosystem, slightly different depending on where you find them in their species composition, but they are all Pine Rocklands just the same. Pine Rockland is characterized by a very open canopy. Some people even don't want to call it a canopy because the pine tree is just one of the many, many species that occur in Pine Rocklands. And if we really don't want to have a dense canopy of them, we just want to have some. But an open canopy of the South Florida slash pine, which is Pinus ellioti variety densa. So we have a lot of slash pines in South Florida, but we have what we call the South Florida slash pine variety densa that occurs in the Pine Rocklands. And it's a very, very hard wood. I've met landowners out in the Miami Redlands who have homes that have been built with Dade County pine and have Dade County pine features in them. And it's the claim is that it's very difficult to even drive a nail through them. They're very, very tough trees. But there's also a very nice understory of both tropical and temperate shrubs and palms that occur in this ecosystem. A lot of diversity there, but the most diverse layer is the rich herbaceous layer that you'll find in pine rocklands, where there's hundreds of species that occur together, both grasses and wildflowers and different kinds of herbs. And these all grow on these limestone outcroppings, this oolitic limestone outcropping at just slightly higher elevations than some of their surrounding habitats that might be coastal marshes or marl prairies. And on the mainland in Florida, like I said before, the Rocklands really exist primarily on the Miami Rock Ridge. So unfortunately, today, if you were to rewind back to 100 years ago, you probably would have seen pioneers going through the pine rocklands and trying to find a place to set up that might be able to be a good place to build a house and try to make a life. But they would have been surrounded by pine trees and pine forest. But today, very less of that is still intact. In fact, it's less than 2% of the original extent of the Miami-Dade County's pine rocklands outside of Everglades National Park, which is very few. And that less than 2% is all divided up into teeny tiny little pieces that make up very few acres. So to find a pine forest today that is, a few hundred acres is a really big deal. But if you think about it in the context of the rest of the state, you might be able to find pine forests that extend for thousands and thousands of acres. So our pine rocklands in Miami-Dade County have been highly fragmented. This map that you can see here just kind of shows the original extent of the Miami Rock Ridge. This little farthest south piece that you see, that is Everglades National Park's pine rocklands on the Rock Ridge, and you can see what is left today. And so just to talk about, some of the different factors that have contributed to the decline of the pine rocklands, it's pretty much a lot of what we see anywhere, but these things all happened very quickly and very early in Miami-Dade County. A lot of unbridled development that caused habitat fragmentation, just building of roads and other types of infrastructure. Inadequate management of the remaining parcels once they had been fragmented, and the invasion of non-native species, but really especially fire suppression, which I'll talk a little bit about more in just a few minutes. And then another challenge that we have today is hydrological, which is somewhat of an impact as a result of human activity, but also with sea level rise and climate change. And so pine rocklands in their pure natural state before their decline have always been a very rich biodiverse ecosystem. But due to the fragmentation and the decline of the ecosystem today, there are a lot of species that we now consider to be very rare, imperiled, and then also endangered and threatened. So Pine Rockland in South Florida currently supports more than 20 federally listed species and many, many more state species of great conservation need. Most of these species that we have that are considered federally protected all occur in those pine rockland fragments outside of Everglades National Park, which really just it speaks to the need for us to find a way to manage this ecosystem in a more effective way. So just to talk a little bit about fire, so all of the different factors that have caused the decline of the pine rocklands, they're all intertwined and interconnected, but the removal of fire from this ecosystem has been a very big deal. So once an ecosystem is fragmented, if you kind of think of the South Florida landscape as one big quilt, if you will, or a landscape is a quilt. If you were to pour water on it or to dump something onto that quilt and it was all intact, then that would probably move across the quilt, and it would all kind of just naturally go until the water ran out. But if you have a quilt that has been completely, just torn up and it's no longer intact anymore, it's not going to have, if you put something on it, it's not going to carry through. And that's kind of the way to think about it with lightning. So lightning is like the number one factor of why we have fire in our fire dependent ecosystems in Florida. We have a lot of lightning here, a lot of really amazing thunderstorms if you haven't experienced them yourself. And these natural lightning strikes, long ago would strike somewhere in a forest, and they would start a fire, and that fire would carry through for as long as it would need to, and then it would naturally go out at the crossing of a river or a rain that might come along and stop it. But today, the chances of a piece of pine forest actually being struck by lightning in the first place are much smaller because of this fragmentation. And then if it does, it's only going to burn a small fragment. It's not going to carry through to the rest of the ecosystem. So these pine forests are very, very fire suppressed, and it causes problems both for people, because when lightning does strike, it causes much more catastrophic wildfires that can be a threat to humans. But it's also really not great for the ecosystem itself. Our pine rocklands are naturally maintained by fire. They require these periodic fires to eliminate the buildup of different types of organic matter, which we call our duff layers. They recycle our nutrients, and they keep that ecosystem biodiverse and resilient. And so without fire, the pine forest loses its diversity, and it loses its function in the ecosystem. So it is a fire community here. And we do have other fire dependent ecosystems in Florida, but pine rocklands are definitely not excluded from that. And I have a little video here. This is, so the Nature Conservancy helped with a burn, or we coordinated a burn, I should say, and implemented a burn for a pine rockland down in Miami-Dade County a couple of years ago. And we took a little video just to kind of show, this is a piece of a pine forest that's just in a neighborhood with some farmland around, and we went out there and we did something called prescribed fire. So rather than letting that lightning strike and cause a fire to happen on its own, we set the fire under controlled conditions and let it burn to mimic what nature would do with that lightning strike, to allow that nutrient cycling and that regeneration of the pine forest. So the video is kind of cool. It's not super cool, but you can take a look. Just a regular day, there's people going to work and mowing the lawn in the field next door. But this is what this pine forest needed. And so that's what we really need more of in our pine forests. If we can't allow for nature to, we can't depend on lightning strikes, I should say, anymore to be the sole driver of fire in our pine rocklands. We need more coordinated efforts with fire as one of our primary things to do to repair this ecosystem. Oops. And I do want to give a shout out to Miami-Dade County folks who do an amazing job of this on protected lands in Miami-Dade County. This is my friend and previous coworker, Rashid Bradley. He's a wildland firefighter that implements prescribed fires out in Miami-Dade County in protected pine rocklands there. And this is what it looks like. This is what it looks like to do a controlled burn. And just a little bit more, so just on the note of fire, this is something we all know, but there's a lot of research too. So University of Florida researchers recently worked with the pine forests in Miami-Dade County, just to really confirm that, fire is what drives the diversity and the function in these pine rocklands. I think I lost a slide. Well, that's okay. That one kind of shows it anyway. So, there's a lot of work that goes into pine rockland management today. And that is everything from managing invasive species to doing controlled burns, trying to protect what's left. There's a lot of different people who are working with pine rocklands. There's public land managers, there's private researchers, there's nonprofits. There's educators, there's a lot of different stakeholders that are involved in pine rockland conservation, because everyone that lives and works with them knows that this is an important ecosystem to protect and to try to keep with us. But the issues are really complex and they're very interdependent, and a lot of them need just more coordination and more resources, really, in order to help this ecosystem. But with all of the information that we have and all of the different people who care, I think what really has been needed is bringing everyone together to kind of come up with a plan and everyone to be on the same page so that we can address the problems together. So we all know that there's a lot of different stressors. We all know in our heads, we think we know what we need to do, but bringing all of that information together in a concise way is really what seems to be what is needed. So the business plan.
Sarah, if I may, do you think this is a good place to stop now that we've gone over what the habitat is, to see if anyone has questions?
Sure.
All right, we already have some questions coming in, and since you were just talking about fire, this is a perfect time to bring that up. There was one question related to fire. What are duff layers?
Duff layers. Okay.
Yes.
So in a pine forest, typically, you get a lot of, if you just look out in nature at any kind of ecosystem, you're going to see that trees grow pine needles or leaves, and they live on the trees, but then they also fall down and they, regenerate, and they grow new pine needles. And so what happens over time is that all of that dead matter, the pine needles and sticks and just parts of plants that are no longer living, they all will build up on the forest floor. And so when they build up on the forest floor like that, we call that duff, is one of the words that we can use for it. But essentially, that organic matter is very flammable. And so if you get a lot of buildup of that layer over years and years and years with no fire coming through, you have a very flammable fuel in your pine forest. And so essentially that's what duff is.
All right.
Hopefully
and are the pines in South Florida mostly slash pine?
We have other types of pines in South Florida. In pine rocklands, we have South Florida slash pines. But other types of pine forests, you will find different species of pines. The primary in our pine flatwoods are Pinus eleodii, not densa if you're not in Dade County. Although you can find occasionally in pine rocklands some non-Dade County pines. That's the primary species, that's the sole species really of pine that you're going to find in our pine rocklands in Miami. But let's say you're in South Florida, but you're in a scrub habitat, then you might find a scrub pine. So that's Pinus plausa.
Mm-hmm.
So we have other types of pine trees in Florida, but the Dade County South Florida slash pine is what you're going to find in your pine rocklands.
Okay, and given that the pine rocklands are in urban settings, is it difficult to plan and to get approval for permission for the prescribed burns?
Well, there are, of course, many different, so trying to burn a pine forest in a highly urbanized area, or trying to burn any kind of habitat in a highly urbanized area is going to be much more challenging than in an area that is out left alone. And so it's they do burn pine rocklands. Different agencies do burn pine rocklands. Everglades National Park burns their pine rocklands. Miami-Dade County burns their pine rocklands. But not all pine rocklands are owned and managed by such an agency. So you have privately owned parcels, you have other parcels and other various types of ownership that don't get that fire that they need. But there's also a limited amount of resources. So even public agencies are only able to burn what they're able to burn. With more resources, they could do more, but they're only able to do what they're able to do. And so it's not so much a problem. I mean, yes, you have to plan your burns differently for different types of urban settings, and there's going to be different challenges that might make it more difficult than if your pine forest was in the middle of complete solitude, but it's not impossible.
Okay. I was curious, are there a lot of pine rocklands left on private lands?
Yeah, there are a significant amount of parcels of pine rockland or pine rockland sites that are still in private ownership. More of them are in public ownership than private, but there are a significant amount that are still in private ownership.
And I had another question about the South Florida slash pine. Is it a protected species?
Ooh, the pine tree itself, I don't know. It's pretty common down in the pine rocklands, but really that tree is not, I mean, some pine rocklands actually have too many pines, and pines need to be removed in order. That's actually what our fires do, is they keep certain types of plants like the South Florida slash pine from becoming too abundant. But in itself, I want to say no, but I don't want to say that and then be wrong. So I would say I can look it up and get you the answer if you would like.
All right. Is there anybody who would like to ask a question? I just started reading all the questions in the chat, but you can unmute yourself and ask a question directly if you're interested. Or we'll get back to you. And
I
you
can keep going.
Yeah, so let's get back to the presentation and hear more about the Pine Rocklands and the business plan.
Yeah, let's get to the business plan.
Yeah.
Okay.
Back to business.
Back to business is right. Bedrock business. Okay, so what is a business plan? So the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service actually is the agency that is working to create this this Pine Rockland business plan, and they have created other business plans for other types of ecosystems, but also other types of habitats, or I'm sorry, species. So they could be species driven or ecosystem driven, and they've had a lot of success with them. And the purpose, from what I understand, is to be able to provide really that concise blueprint of the strategies and the resources that are required to achieve the desired conservation outcome. And I think that's a really important statement to kind of just sit and think on for a minute. So it's complex. We've got the blueprint that says, it's kind of different than just having a recommendations that we all see different land management plans and things like that. We've got recommendations and goals and things like that, but we really need a concise strategy, this blueprint, if you will, of actions that need to be taken, direct actions, where they're going to happen, and how much really they're going to cost, for us to be able to understand what we need to ask for so that we can actually when we say, hey, we need funding for this pine rockland that we want to save, we can have actual, A, B, and C. This is what needs to get done. This one is a high priority because it falls into these different it has these different components to it, and it's part of this bigger plan, and this is the resources that it's going to require to do that work. So the business plan concept was newer to me when I came into this project, but as we've been working through it, I should say this is a project that's in progress right now. Just learning about it makes a lot of sense, because, and especially for something like Pine Rocklands, where again, we have so many people who care, we have a lot of stakeholders, we have a lot of information about Pine Rocklands. Everyone knows that we need to do something, and everyone wants to work together, but it's this blueprint of strategies, and just identifying the resources needed that that might be what will turn the corner for us in Pine Rockland conservation. So that is essentially what a business plan is. So we are working with the Fish and Wildlife Service. The Nature Conservancy has partnered with the Fish and Wildlife Service specifically to carry out this Pine Rockland business plan project. And by doing so, we included additional partners because we don't think that it's right. This isn't something we should do by ourselves, with other key stakeholders and experts from the Institute for Regional Conservation, Fairchild Tropical Botanic Garden, who has a lot of botanical expertise, particularly relating to the Pine Rocklands, the folks at Miami-Dade County, and then the greater Pine Rockland community that's included in the Pine Rockland Working Group. So the background and the purpose, the Pine Rockland business plan is currently in progress. It is a plan that is not really intended to replace any kind of conservation strategy that already is out there or could be in the works. It's really designed to augment and support those conservation plans and strategies. And it's done in a way that we can really quantify and prioritize the conservation actions that we need to take to actually improve the Pine Rockland extent and condition throughout its range. And again, because we've got so many different listed species, that's especially why Fish and Wildlife Service, I think, thinks that this is a worthy project, and definitely so do we. And so working with all of these different partners and stakeholders to come together on this business plan and develop those strategies, that's what we've set out to do. And it's ecosystem based. So we're not thinking about, there's a lot of conservation strategies that are specific to a different, an endangered species of some sort. This is supposed to really, be good for all of the species in the ecosystem, looking at it at the bird's eye view of the ecosystem itself and what we need to do to repair it that will benefit all of those species that are listed and endangered and rare and imperiled. So specifically, we are working together as a team to quantify different conservation through kind of the first step of this project is we have been assessing the existing Pine Rocklands in their range in Miami-Dade County and Monroe counties outside of Everglades National Park to really assess their condition, to get that snapshot of what their current condition is and their management needs. We also want to identify prior converted lands within the historic Pine Rockland distribution that can be restored to expand the extent or the footprint of the Pine Rocklands. So that map where you saw the Miami Rock Ridge, what it used to be, what it is today, there are a lot of pieces of land that are no longer pine forest. Maybe they're now an agricultural field, or they're a, some sort of roadside corridor or a canal bank, but they still support Pine Rockland species and they still have substrate that is somewhat intact. And so those prior converted lands can be restored to Pine Rockland. So we can actually expand our acreage and increase that number from 2% to something higher, possibly. We need to estimate our costs of acquisition and of management actions on a per acre basis so that we can apply it across a scale. And then we're parameterizing all of this in maps. So it has a geospatial component to it. And then once we get through all of this, then we're prioritizing our conservation and restoration opportunities based on the costs and the ecological values that we identify. So we've got a kind of a core project team for our Pine Rocklands. Kevin Calais from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is really our project sponsor and director, Chris Berg, our South Florida program manager with the Nature Conservancy, myself, George Gann, who is with the Institute for Regional Conservation, Jennifer Posley from from Fairchild Tropical Botanic Garden, Janet Gill and some of the other folks from Miami-Dade County, and then Kathy Freeman, who is our geospatial analyst with the Nature Conservancy, and Emily Bauer from the Fish and Wildlife Service. And I won't spend too much time here because I know it's a lot of text, but just to give you a general timeline, this project started in 2019, and we have had some meetings with the broad Pine Rockland community throughout our project. We are right now going through some workshops with our internal team, and then in April, we should have a draft of our final Pine Rockland business plan ready for feedback from the greater Pine Rockland community, and we'll be developing recommendations for next steps beyond the business plan. And then by June, our project should be finished. We will have our final draft of the Pine Rockland business plan available, or finished, I should say. So a lot of collaboration and teamwork has happened with this project. We've been out in the field together. We've brainstormed and brought all of our different types of expertise together in various ways. We had a really good meeting at the Zoo Miami. If you've never been to Zoo Miami, it's awesome. They've got Pine Rocklands too. You should get out there, and met with a lot of our stakeholders there. And since the pandemic, we've had a lot of our meetings on Zoom. So a lot of meeting in different ways to create our Pine Rockland business plan. And some of the key elements of the Pine Rockland business plan. So Jennifer Posley from Fairchild Tropical Botanic Garden has worked specifically to develop a rare and imperiled species matrix, identifying all of the rare and imperiled species across Miami-Dade and Monroe County Pine Rocklands outside of Everglades National Park, to identify their ranges, their abundance, and where they are geospatially, so that that information can be included in the business plan, as well as conservation management recommendations for those species, and then cost data. So if there's a rare plant or a rare animal reintroduction opportunity, what does it realistically cost to do that on a parcel, or in a specific area that might include many parcels? We have our ecological restoration team that is led by George Gann from the Institute for Regional Conservation, and he has developed an indicator framework and a reference model. So that's kind of hard to explain, but basically a baseline of what Pine Rocklands are in their best condition, and what a recovery target is for those species, or for those different types of conditions in the ecosystem. And this is something that is very dynamic. So, you change one thing, you change another, you can get a different idea of where a place, a specific spot is in the ecosystem, or the ecosystem itself, how's it doing with this recovery wheel and indicator framework. But they'll also just identifying those key ecological restoration and management needs and the costs to do that. So if you're going to remove invasive species or conduct a controlled burn, the different costs on a per acre basis of how that will look. And then in data, our data and GIS team, led by Kathy Freeman, has been working to bring all of the data together that we have about species, about costs, about ownership and acreages, and different management statuses and needs of different types of Pine Rocklands across the range. Let's see how I'm doing on time. 2:42. Okay. And then a really big part of this has been so we've got all of this data. Some of it's more historic, some of it's more current, but what we didn't really have is that snapshot of, like, how is the ecosystem doing? And right now, basically, how are all these parcels doing, or sites, Pine Rockland sites doing, or fragments? And so what we did is we wanted to provide like a qualitative snapshot of the conditions across the ecosystem outside of Everglades National Park. And really highlight the opportunities for different strategies for acquisition, restoration, and management. And so, so we did this with ArcGIS. So I'm not sure how many of you all use ArcGIS, but we, our Kathy Freeman, our geospatial analyst, developed this tool in ArcGIS that essentially creates a map where different experts, different land managers, others that know Pine Rocklands who we've invited in to do our survey with us can put in an address or put in a site name, and it will take them directly to one of these little pink dots, which are Pine Rocklands, and bring up a survey. And the survey has a lot of different questions about the condition of the pine rockland. So it asks about the structure of it. How many, what is the pine canopy cover? What is the shrub cover? How are the herbaceous species? Has there been fire there recently? And what are the invasive species like? Is there a lot of illegal dumping? Different questions that you can't necessarily get from anything else other than a land manager telling you exactly how a site is doing. And so luckily, this is something that's in progress right now. We've had many surveys conducted by different land managers, both in the Keys and in Miami-Dade County, who know these parcels so well, so intimately as only a land manager can do, to answer these surveys as best as they can to give us that overall snapshot, not just of the parcel itself, but of once we have them all, the ecosystem. So this is just kind of what this survey actually looks like. It doesn't have pop-up pictures and things. This is more of just to show you how they're thinking about these questions. And if this might be too much, but this is what our survey looks like. And so as our surveys are wrapping up and we're getting our qualitative snapshot of the ecosystem, we're entering into another phase of the project, which is kind of the final phase before our Pine Rockland business plan is going to be put together, is something called decision analysis. And this is something that is being led by Kevin Clays from the Fish and Wildlife Service. And this is really bringing everyone back together after we've kind of gone through all of the other work that we've done on this to really make sure that we have a well-defined problem statement. What truly is the problem in the Pine Rocklands? And what truly are some of the needs and opportunities that we all can think of that we can bring together? What are some of the trade-offs and the alternatives if we don't do anything, either on a specific site level or on an ecosystem level? And then taking all of this information to create our actionable steps towards meaningful conservation outcomes. So this is really actually the phase that we're in right now, and it's pretty complex. I'm still having a hard time with some of it, but it's coming together nicely, and it's thoughtful. It brings together everything from the ecosystem services that Pine Rocklands provides. So Pine Rocklands are wonderful for their own sake, for their biodiversity that they provide, for being these remnant real pieces of South Florida in Miami and Miami-Dade and Monroe counties. But they also provide green space for people to go and recreate in. They help with our clean air. They reduce urban heat. There's a lot of things like that to think about with Pine Rocklands, in addition to their pure intrinsic value that they have just on their own. And so, how can we think about our Pine Rocklands on a bird's eye view, looking at the ecosystem, and how can we prioritize our conservation of them? And so essentially we need to just bring all of the information together and then what we will have is recommendations on, our priorities. So where do we think we need to start? If you do this, what is it going to benefit the most? So I'm just trying to think of like a tangible example. Is it more effective to burn a 10-acre site of Pine Rockland than to, let's say, try to restore an old farm field? back to Pine Rockland, or maybe for some reason in a specific area, it does actually make sense to do that because of the connectivity that that farm field might provide. So we can't make those decisions without bringing all of the information together. And so that's what bringing together the geospatial elements, all of the data that we have, and then putting it into this decision analysis, we'll be able to come up with those meaningful conservation outcomes so that we have a tool essentially that can be utilized by people who work with Pine Rocklands. So this isn't meant to do anything other than be helpful to those who work with Pine Rocklands to be able to reference this blueprint and understand their actions that they're taking. So what could be our priorities? What are the resources we need? What do we need to ask for? And how are we going to do this? And so we are not here yet. We're still in that decision analysis phase of the project, but hopefully by June, we will have a business plan together that will really be that critical tool for all Pine Rockland conservation partners, and that we can begin to really repair this ecosystem and hopefully grow it too. Maybe there's a really great way to expand what the idea is, what we call it in Miami-Dade County, in particular Pine Rocklands in both Miami-Dade and Monroe counties is expanding our footprint. So we want to expand the footprint of the Pine Rocklands that we have today to be more in the future. I don't know why that picture came later. So that's my presentation on Pine Rocklands. I care deeply about the Pine Rocklands. Before I worked with TNC, I worked for the Institute for Regional Conservation as the Pine Rockland Initiative Coordinator, and my job was only working in Pine Rocklands for 5 years. So I really do hope this Pine Rockland business plan comes together nicely, and that we can do what is needed to protect and conserve and repair this ecosystem. And just as a last shout out, the reason I do it, I have a little one who I think about it, and I want her to be able to have as much green space someday as I do, if not more. So when she's my age. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. We really appreciated that. Sorry, Cheryl, to cut you off. I didn't mean to. I just wanted to thank you and then roll it over, Cheryl, to see if there's any questions. Go right ahead.
Yeah, definitely. And if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. I was very good at reading the chat earlier and ignored you if you wanted to speak. Now, speak or forever hold your peace. Actually, that's not true. Sarah will answer questions about Pine Rocklands anytime. But
I will.
Yeah, if you want to ask your question personally to her, you can put your hand up by clicking on the reactions, and there's a raise hand function, or you can just unmute yourself. But there was a question that came in about identifying Pine Rocklands habitat, and there's someone who said they are at Jonathan Dickinson State Park all the time and love Jonathan Dickinson. And what distinguishes Pine Rocklands from the pine habitat you see at Jonathan Dickinson?
That's a great question. And it's really the substrate. So in Miami-Dade County and in Monroe County, the reason we have Pine Rocklands there, but not in other places, is our oolitic limestone. So as Kate dubbed the presentation, the bedrock, it really does boil back down to that. So it's that substrate that our Pine Rocklands grow on that makes it so unique.
Mm-hmm. All right. I'm looking for some live questions. I'll give you a second, because I tend to just talk and talk, and you may not think there's an opportunity, but there is right now.
I posted an item on the chat about what are the cost ranges that, so if you're, as you go forward, what kind of budget does a county, state, federal, whatever, what are the commitments we would need there?
That's all. So we're still in the works of, like, for the purpose of the business plan, identifying those like costs per acre, but it's kind of a complex thing to explain, because if you have let's say you have a pine rockland that's been very well managed by the county, it's in great condition. You want to keep doing that because you don't want it to degrade. But the cost to continue that might not be, like, that's going to be different than if you have a piece of pine rockland that has never had any management. It is extremely fire suppressed, extremely full of invasive species. That cost is going to be higher for what could be for some things. So it's complex because you've got kind of costs for, let's say, doing fire. You've got costs for invasive species removal. You've got costs if you want to, let's say you have a site that has a bunch of illegal dumping on it. That could be a cost. What else? Reintroducing rare or extirpated species. All of these things do have costs associated with them. And they're going to vary depending on what it is and the site. And so that's kind of part of what the Pine Rockland business plan does, is brings together those costs so that we can apply them across the scale. But it could be anything from, you can burn a piece of land for very cheap to, if you have a site that is extremely compounded by invasive species, might be very expensive.
Mm-hmm. Well, you brought up reintroductions or translocations of species. Are
yes, translocations
that's happening for right now, or that you see that coming up?
So that, that already does happen. The folks, I don't want to speak for all of their work. I would want them to speak for what they do, but the experts such as at Fairchild Tropical Botanic Garden, folks at Miami-Dade County, even Institute for Regional Conservation, all of these botanical experts already, and I'm speaking specifically about plants, this happens with animals too. These things do happen, but to be able to do it in a way that's effective across the ecosystem, bringing those costs together to understand what is truly needed versus what, hey, we can try to do this, like we have like this many acorns and we're only able to do this, but if we actually had the acorns we needed, we could do this. That's kind of what the Pine Rockland business plan does.
That sounds great. Does anybody else have any questions on here with? I'm trying to be patient and not my questions.
And you can always send me an email or whatever too. Like, I'm happy to answer questions later.
Yeah, I was wondering if so far in this process, if there's anything that's been surprising to you.
Yeah, I think the main surprising part is just, again, that we have, like, the problem isn't necessarily about people not caring or anything like that. It's more about just harnessing all of the information that we have, all of the knowledge that we have, and then putting it together in an effective way so that we can really actually create change. Because there is so much great information out there about Pine Rocklands and so many people who are doing such great work already with Pine Rocklands. And this isn't meant to replace the work that anyone's doing. It's really, again, just supposed to support it. So for me, it's been a growth experience and a learning experience, just learning how that's possible. Because I've been the person out there forever, just out killing the weeds, and like, why do people still litter and why do people still do this and that? But it's such a bigger scale, of change that we need,
Yeah. My cat Zora strongly feels that not litter or introduce invasive species in Pine Rocklands.
That too, yeah, definitely clean off your shoes before you go into your next natural area.
Yes, definitely. Do you think that this process will provide information that could shape sustainable development in the future that could be compatible with Pine Rocklands?
I don't know. I don't know. I think that the idea here is definitely to be sustainable.
All right. I think that might be it.
Cool.
Great. Well, thank you again, Sarah, and thank you all of you for joining us today. We appreciate all of your participation and your questions.